Welcome back to episode 2 of the Silent Siren, where we bring to light the silent struggles first responders face while battling PTSD. I'm your host, Jason Demo. First off, I really want to say thank you to all of you who reached out with feedback and encouragement and kind words from the first episode. I knew that not very many people would listen to a brand new podcast that nobody knows about, but I was genuinely surprised by the number of people who reached out about it. It was honestly very encouraging to hear from some of you who can relate to the struggles that I discussed, and I had several correspondences where people basically said, hey, I was never a first responder or in the military or anything like that, but I can relate to what you said. Particularly some of the things I mentioned about depression and anxiety and just my mental health in general. I said it in the first episode, but I truly hope this podcast can help people, and it brought me great joy to hear that some of what I said resonated with people, even people who aren't even part of the first responder community. And it was also kind of a stark reminder that many people, especially men, are struggling greatly in our society with mental health. And I'll admit, this podcast, recording it is not easy. It's actually mentally exhausting for me to think about all kinds of trauma and verbalize it. And I also work on this at night and on the weekends, so it doesn't interfere with my work responsibilities. So it forces me to spend my free time putting effort into it. And to be honest, it's really, really difficult sometimes just to process this stuff and verbalize it. But I'm doing it because I know that it's good for me to stop bottling everything up, and I know that it's good for me to do it because some of what I share can help people, and that really makes it worth the struggle and effort. So as I was thinking about the future of this podcast, one thing I want to start doing at the beginning of each episode is I want to share a story about something that has happened recently in my life as it relates to kind of my mental health journey. I have like dozens and dozens of episode ideas already kind of planned out. At least topics that I want to discuss and get into. And I don't want to wait weeks or even months to discuss some of these topics. And I think it will kind of be an interesting way for some of you to potentially gain something beneficial from each episode, even if the episode topic isn't something that interests you. My plan is kind of just to share something that's going on in my life. Maybe it's a win, maybe it's a struggle, maybe it's something I'm dealing with, a situation that I was part of, something that I've overcome recently or dealt with, whatever. I'd like to kind of almost treat it as a debrief and share with you whatever I've learned from a particular situation that I recently encountered. So here's the first one, and I hope it resonates with some of you. So a couple weeks ago, my wife and I were driving to church, and we were on a 2-lane back road. We live in rural Kentucky, so it's not uncommon for us to be on random back roads that are not major highways. It's pretty common for us. And it's also not uncommon, especially in the spring and fall during harvest season, to get caught behind some type of large tractor, massive piece of farm equipment. And I can usually brush off the farm equipment or tractors and not get too irritated because I understand and appreciate that lifestyle, and I know that those dudes are working crazy hard to provide for their families, so the farm equipment doesn't really bother me. However, I have zero patience for bad drivers, especially bad drivers that are very, 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 very slow when there's no reason to go slow. So this time there was a sedan in front of us, and it was going 35 miles an hour, and we were in a 55 mile per hour zone. And if I'm being honest, I'm usually driving at minimum 10 to 20 miles per hour over the speed limit. So this person was going at the bare minimum 30 miles per hour, too slow for my liking. And I was upset. In the grand scheme of things, it's not a big deal. It wasn't a big deal. But I flew off the handle. I started yelling and screaming and pounding the steering wheel and was just downright belligerent. I didn't get violent or anything, but I was incredibly heated, like well beyond normal driving frustration that we all have from time to time. So I kind of had this outburst and continued yelling, and then I was finally able to pass the vehicle. I started to calm down once we kind of went around them and I could speed up to my preferred speed. And I took a deep breath and I kind of thought about what had just happened, and I apologized to my wife. Like, none of my anger was directed at her, but she was there in the passenger seat and she was the only one to take the brunt of it. There was nobody else around. But I also didn't stop at just apologizing. Like, I started thinking about, okay, like, what had just happened? Like, and I tried to identify why. And that's the key word, why it happened. And one thing I've recently started doing just in my mental health recovery journey is I've been really trying hard to identify what causes the different episodes that I experience, and then kind of trying to figure out maybe why they happened. And I'm sure my therapist will obviously help me a lot more with that as I have more sessions with them. But I'm really trying to take a step back, especially when I get angry or have a panic attack or have a flashback or whatever. I try to take a step back and identify exactly what caused it. And I used to just move along like nothing happened and not even address it, just kind of accept it as a normal part of my life and not really think about it at all, just move on. And then what I've been trying to do is I've tried to start verbalizing this to my wife and explaining to her what's going on in my head when these incidents happen. And I've never done this before. This is very, very new to me, but it's healthy. And I used to just have whatever PTSD symptom would manifest, however it would manifest in my life, and then when it was over, just move on, no thoughts about it, no remorse about it, no desire to talk about it, and certainly no desire to try to change that behavior. So this is growth for me, it's progress, and I consider it a win. So we're sitting in the truck, and I remember saying to her, that's a PTSD reaction. And then I kind of explained it to her, and I said, hey, when I was a cop, you had to get everywhere as fast as you could. If you can't get somewhere fast, there's kind of just this constant pressure that, oh my gosh, something bad is going to happen because you didn't arrive quickly enough. And now, in general, this isn't a bad mindset to have if you're a first responder. Like, if you're going to a hot call, you obviously should not take your time and stop to get food and fill up your gas tank and drop your uniform off with a dry cleaner before you respond to that robbery in progress or structure fire or whatever. Like, we all understand this. And of course, there's the opposite end of the spectrum where you need to get from point A to point B safely, as safely as possible, because you can't help anybody if you get in a wreck and you get hurt or die on the way to a call. Like, you got to get there safely. So while you need to get there fast, you can't be careless. So there's two ends of that spectrum, obviously, but that's a whole conversation for another episode. So anyways, I explained to her that it's just been literally ingrained in my being, in my mindset, that I have to get wherever I'm going quickly. I've got to get there as quickly as possible. And to a normal, rational person whose brain is functioning correctly, being slightly delayed on the way to church is not going to be a big deal. It's not like you're late to your child's high school graduation or your best friend's wedding, and it's certainly not a matter of life and death, like I was kind of making it out to be. And the worst thing that was going to happen is we were going to be a couple minutes late to church. That is not a big deal. And that probably isn't going to happen because I'm obsessed with being early everywhere we go. So we left early for church like we always do. So it wasn't even like remotely realistic that this concern I had in this instance. And so I continue to kind of explain to my wife that that's how my brain operates, and I apologized for losing it in the truck, even though it wasn't directed towards her. And I got to explain how my brain operates and what this process is like. And I kind of consider 3 major wins here. Number 1, I identified inappropriate behavior. I was flying off the handle, and that reaction does not fit the situation. That is not correlating properly. Like, that is not okay. And then 2, I was able to kind of take a step back and I identified what triggered that behavior. And what was that? Okay, my brain is used to 100 miles an hour all the time. I'm conditioned that a slow response means bad things happening. If I don't get there quickly, something bad is going to happen. That's just how I'm wired after spending almost 9 years in law enforcement. And then 3, this is almost like the most important, I feel like, for me, is I talked about it. I actually verbalized it. I opened up about it, something I've failed to do for well over a decade. And so that's what happened. And that's kind of how I played that whole situation out. And with that said, like, I don't have this perfect solution for you if you're struggling with overreacting to situations like I do. And like that example, I don't even have the solution for myself in that situation necessarily. However, taking the time to identify why these things are happening is an amazing start, in my opinion. And I need to take that a step further and figure out ways from preventing these kind of episodes and things from happening in the first place. And this is something that I'll most certainly be working through with my therapist. But like I said, this is major progress. I identified what was going on, why it happened, and then I was able to verbalize it and explain it to my wife. This is an example of inappropriate behavior, but understandable behavior given what I've been through and gone through and how I've been trained and how I've lived and whatnot. So inappropriate, but understandable behavior. So anyways, hopefully you enjoyed that little segment that I'm going to start off these episodes with. And now that we're already almost 11, 12 minutes into this, we will get started with the actual episode today. And I have entitled today's episode, Scanning the Room, Missing the Moment, the Cost of Hypervigilance. In the first episode, I spoke a bit about hypervigilance and gave a few examples of how it's affected me, and I got some good feedback on that, so I wanted to address it a bit more in depth in another episode, and so here we are. And I would kind of like to discuss my personal struggles with hypervigilance a little bit and how they manifest in my day-to-day life, as well as explore some strategies I'm working on to reduce my hypervigilance to an appropriate level of vigilance, not hypervigilance. And I said before in the first episode that my hypervigilance started showing up about 6 years or so into my career. And I've always been a fairly prepared person. I grew up in Florida, so I'm used to the panic that comes when a hurricane is on the way. I'm used to having to prepare when a big storm is coming that's going to hit Florida. And I hate the term prepper because of the negative connotations with it, but I started prepping many years ago. I like to know that my house is self-sustainable for a period of time if the power goes out or if the water stops running and we can't get groceries or supplies anywhere. I get comfort in knowing that I'm prepared for a winter ice storm here in Kentucky. I'm prepared for potential government lockdowns again if that crap happens. I'm prepared for a riot or protest occurring in my town. I'm prepared for an extended power outage, things like that. I like keeping a lot of gear in my truck, recovery gear, medical supplies. I have a get-home bag, radios, all kinds of useful gear. If I tossed extra food and water in my truck, I could probably sustain myself for quite a bit of time with only the items in my truck because I keep a lot of stuff in it. I keep a trauma kit in every room of the house, and maybe that's overkill, but if there's an accident across the house, I don't want to have to run all the way across the house to get life-saving equipment, so that's just something I've done for years. There's obviously fire extinguishers all over my house and my workshop and in my vehicles. I even have them attached to my zero-turn mower and my side-by-side, like my equipment for our property. I am an avid firearm and gear collector. I have lots of guns and gear and ammo. I have a home gym that I built, and I like to stay in shape, and I think physical fitness is often overlooked in the prepper quote-unquote community, even though I hate that word. I keep a healthy amount of locally raised meat in our freezers and food and water storages and long-term food and water storages. I read every day and continually strive to kind of expand my knowledge in a wide variety of topics, from theology to mindset, mental health, random topics, and then entertainment books. But I read quite a bit. And then if I can't read and I'm driving somewhere, I'm typically always listening to an audio book, if not a podcast. I have ways to procure and purify water. I've got maps in my local areas, generators, extra gas stored. The list goes on and on. I don't need to bore you with all that. And I would consider all these things good things. I think it's prudent to consider most of them, maybe not necessarily to the level that I have, because I can get sometimes a little obsessive with them, but it's good to ask yourself, like, how long can you provide for your family if everything around you stopped for a period of time? However, my hypervigilance manifests itself not so much in all the ways that I prepare, but in the ways that I worry. Being prepared is wise, constantly worrying is not. I struggle with a constant worry that the worst possible scenario is going to happen. When I'm driving, I'm constantly envisioning car wrecks. This causes me to incessantly think about how to avoid them when I'm driving. When I'm out in public, I'm scanning for potential threats. I'm paying attention to everything and everyone around me and what they're doing. I'm always looking for all of the exits in case of an emergency. I'm always picking out who has a gun. It's a little game I like to play, like who's carrying a gun. I'm analyzing what people are wearing, what kinds of shoes they have on, what's their demeanor and body language telling me, and does it match whatever environment or situation we're in. If I go to a movie theater or a concert or some other form of public entertainment, I'm looking around and picturing all the bad things that could happen and thinking about how I could respond to it. Like, is there going to be an active shooter? What if there's a medical emergency? What if there's a fire? What if there's a natural disaster? Like, you name it, I'm thinking about it. Outside of flying, I am never 100% disarmed, and I pretty much refuse to go anywhere that I can't carry a firearm. And even when I'm flying, how do I put this? When I'm flying, I'm not 100% disarmed. I'll just leave it at that. Moving on, we live in Kentucky, like I've said, and one of the things I wasn't prepared for when we moved here was the constant thunderstorm warnings where there's high winds and tornadoes and huge hail. They're like regularly projected in the forecast, and I thought I'd be used to that from Florida, but it's crazy here in Kentucky. We have a basement, and I have it set up as not only my home office, but also it's basically a mini apartment at this point, so my wife and I can stay down there comfortably with our 6 dogs. Yes, I said six dogs during a storm. We've got multiple beds down there, dog crates, food, water, lights, battery backups, chargers, medical supplies, food, water, just all kinds of stuff. And again, this isn't a bad thing, but I will often sit at my computer, almost like it's this little mobile command center or something, and I will watch the storm track and all the updates, sometimes for hours on end. I like watching the YouTube channels, the amateur weather guys that update you on the go, and they have storm chaser feeds that you can watch. It's fascinating to me, and it's way better than your local news or national weather media, and it's more up-to-date and faster information, in my opinion, and it's just the entertainment value is much higher, in my opinion. And again, this isn't necessarily a bad thing at face value, but obsessing over a tornado chance for hours on end is not healthy. I recognize that. A quick story from this past weekend, just kind of an example of just how my mind works. I'm sure, obviously, all of you are aware that we bombed Iran. And my wife and I, we were in different rooms when it happened, and then we met up in the living room and started talking about it. My wife was like, hey, did you see that we bombed Iran? And you know what my first reaction was? I responded, I was like, yeah, sleeper cells. Sleeper cells. Like, I immediately went off about sleeper cells and the potential for terrorist attacks happening now on American soil, and how those chances have gone through the roof, and because of our immigration policies. And I was telling her that, like, it's not just illegal immigrants that have come across the border, it's all kinds of terrorists, and on and on and on. And I'll admit, I actually think that's a very valid concern. There's nothing wrong with that. I think that's a serious, valid concern. And if you've been paying attention to anything that's been going on, you would agree with that. And even like the mainstream media outlets conservative and left-wing and everything in between have started bringing this up the past few days. But it's just kind of funny looking back that my mind immediately went to that. Like, I was immediately like, okay, threat mode. Like, we bombed Iran. What does that mean for us? So, anyways, those are a few ways that my hypervigilance impacts my life on a day-to-day basis in some ways, and maybe some of you can relate to that. And it often manifests when I'm considering potentially dangerous situations. The problem is it also manifests itself in some of the most mundane day-to-day activities. Like, it's not limited to some of the examples I just listed, which some of the examples I gave, like, some of those are realistic concerns. But for example, I often get severe anxiety when my phone rings, or I get an email, or I receive a text. Like, I instantly go to the worst case scenario in my mind. This phone call is going to be bad news. It's going to be terrible. This text is going to be notifying me of a tragedy or something horrible. This email is going to be something terrible. And it's mentally exhausting to be constantly going into, like, having your mind go into fight or flight mode over some of the most mundane daily tasks that you have to do every day. Like, stressing over an email as if it was a life or death scenario takes a toll on you. I actually received a very bad phone call years ago, and I had to change my ringtone after it happened, because every time I heard my phone ring, I went to a very dark place because of that phone call. So I changed my ringtone, and to this day, it's a popular iPhone ringtone. So, like, to this day, I have a bad reaction if I hear that ringtone on someone else's phone. So yeah, that's like a way that it manifests for me as well. But I want to kind of talk about a few ways that this hypervigilance negatively impacts me on a day-to-day basis, just kind of almost like the side effects from it, and maybe some of you can relate to it. But first, it's exhausting. Absolutely exhausting. Living in a constant state of worry, always thinking about the worst case scenario and working out a way to prevent or react to those situations is, like, absolutely exhausting. When your mind is constantly going at 100 miles per hour, it is bound to get overloaded and overstimulated. I get overstimulated very, very easily. And this creates mental fatigue, which then in turn creates physical fatigue for me too. Like, if you live somewhere that tornadoes are a very real threat, you should absolutely have a plan for how to get your family to your basement or safe space. Like, that's wise. However, obsessing for hours while the storm is approaching, while it's hitting, and after it's passed is like hours of your life that you'll never get back, and you could have spent them on something much more profitable. And I do that. I struggle with that. And so this constant worry mentally exhausts me. It physically exhausts me. And then it often kind of manifests itself with issues with my body. Like, my muscles are often extremely sore just from the constant tension, particularly like my shoulders and neck. I will catch myself tensing up all the time, and I'm often not even aware that I was doing it for a while. And then all of a sudden I'm like, oh man, I am like so tense. I grind my teeth all the time. I will often get headaches. My body aches. I will sweat when I'm just sitting at my computer and the air conditioning working and not even moving. But I'm also constantly moving, like very restless. Like, I don't sit still. I toss and turn all night, and I will often like completely destroy the sheets and comforter just from tossing and turning. So hypervigilance is exhausting, like mentally and physically. Second, and this is why I named this episode Scanning the Room, Missing the Moment. When you're this hypervigilant all the time, it causes you to miss out on important moments in your life. And I have missed a lot of moments in my life because of this. And it's really hard to think about it and consider it and know that I've missed out on things I can never get back. But if you're at a movie and all you can think about is something terrible happening, it defeats the purpose of trying to go relax and enjoy some fun entertainment. If you're at the beach with your family and all you can think about is shark attacks or your kids drowning or rip currents or what's the tide doing? Is someone going to kidnap my child on the beach? Like all these things, like you are missing out on valuable moments with your family. If you can't turn the vigilance off for a few hours at a concert, for example, you're not going to enjoy the music and the band you paid good money to go see. Constantly worrying about the worst case scenario robs you of your joy in life, particularly in some of the most joyful and enjoyable moments in your life. Nobody wants to daydream about an active shooter during their kid's basketball game. That's no fun, but a lot of us do that. If your child is graduating from high school, you should be focused on enjoying that once in a lifetime moment and being proud as a parent. You shouldn't be thinking about all the possible bad things that could happen. Normal people don't struggle with this, but if you're like me, you can struggle with this immensely on a day-to-day basis. So that's another way that it kind of manifests in struggles in my life, or causes struggles in my life that really negatively impact me. And then third, and this is kind of related to the previous one, but being hypervigilant causes you to intentionally avoid positive things in life. Particularly what I mean is avoidance of like specific people, places, or things. So there are places that I used to enjoy going to, but I no longer enjoy going to them. I lived in the Orlando area pretty much my entire life up until 3 years ago, and I used to love visiting the theme parks. The thought of going to Disney right now makes me sick. Like, no thank you. Not interested. Keep those crowds and people and lines to yourself. Not interested. I avoid attending events that involve groups that will require like significant social interaction, particularly events like where I'm required to interact significantly with other people. I don't want to be forced to interact with a large group of people, especially people who aren't like me. And if I do go to events like that, I will often disappear for a bit. I'll go to the bathroom for a bit. I'll go outside. I was at a horse event in Lexington a couple months ago, and pretty much every hour and a half or so, I literally left the event, went out to the parking lot, sat in my truck with my service dog, just chilled for a little bit. Didn't want to be overstimulated. Like that happens all the time for me. The one kind of group exception for me is my recovery meetings. Like I actually really enjoy my recovery meetings, but I'm not forced to interact in those if I don't want to. I can pass my speaking time and just listen to everyone else and just kind of blend in with the crowd, and like I don't have to talk, so that's kind of nice. Another issue, and I mentioned this in the first episode, but right now especially, I avoid most calls and texts and emails unless they are work related. If it is not professional, I am probably not going to respond if it's not a professional correspondence. Like I will handle my work stuff, my professional correspondences, but I will avoid most of my personal interactions with people. It just makes me uncomfortable and gives me anxiety, and I avoid it. If I see someone I know in public, I will turn the other way and often avoid them if I can. And I know all of this is not healthy, but it's how I feel all the time, and I'm just sharing it with you guys. So those are some of the ways that hypervigilance kind of robs me of moments in life, and I'm sure some of you can relate to that. And something that I've learned recently about hypervigilance is it really causes you to excessively worry, but excessively worry in situations that seem safe. Like, if you're on the Titanic and it's sinking, that is a time to worry. That's an acceptable time to worry. But excessively worrying in safe situations is what makes it very unhealthy, at least for me and what I experience. Like, if you're driving through downtown Atlanta at, let's say, 2 a.m. while you're like on a work trip or something, there's an appropriate amount of worry you should have. Like, you should probably not pull over and stop for gas in the middle of the hood in downtown Atlanta at 2 a.m. on your trip. Waiting 20 minutes till you get out of the main city is probably a prudent and wise thing for you to do. Like, that is being vigilant. That's being wise. That's making smart decisions, and there's nothing wrong with that. However, taking your family to the beach on a Saturday and worrying about 500 different potential disasters or tragedies that are extremely unlikely to happen is not healthy, particularly when that worry and anxiety prevents you from enjoying the moments with your family, and particularly when that worry prevents you from relaxing, and also when that worry doesn't allow you to focus on the things that truly matter in life. So, to kind of wrap this up, what are some ways that I'm trying to combat this unhealthy hypervigilance? Like, how am I working through this? Well, first, I'm trying to be realistic. And this is so much easier said than done, but I am trying to take a step back and think about what I'm worrying about. When I start getting worried, I'm like, okay, let me ask myself, how realistic is this concern of mine? Is it possible that someone is going to come into this restaurant wearing a suicide vest and detonate it and commit some terrorist attack? Yes, that's possible. And I'd argue it's even more so possible given the Iran situation, but I won't get on a soapbox with that in my sleeper cell obsession I have right now. But based on the restaurant that I'm at and the area that I'm in and how often something like that actually happens in the United States, like, how realistic is it that that's going to happen? Chances are it is not realistic at all. I don't frequent shady places anymore, and I live in a small rural town with very little crime. Like, is it possible? Of course it's possible, but does it mean that I leave my gun at home and become complacent? Like, absolutely not. But it does mean that there are a lot of situations in my day-to-day life that, while possible, they are not probable. I am trying to not worry about those things. I am trying to not obsess over those things. Possibility of something happening and probability of something happening are two very different things. And so I'm really trying to work through that on a day-to-day basis. Because I also don't want to take it to the other extreme where I just become so complacent and never carry a gun and never plan for something bad happening and just stick my head in the sand and pretend like everything's okay and nothing bad ever happens in the world. Like, I don't want to take it that far. The problem is the opposite extreme of that, the hypervigilance extreme, is where I'm at, and so I have to meet in the middle somehow. So another thing that I've been doing is I've been trying to avoid certain forms of entertainment. And what I mean by that is, I'm not going to lie. Like, I like violent movies and shows. I'm not a horror fan, but action movies or war movies or something like John Wick, where he kills 150 bad guys for killing his dog, like, that violence doesn't bother me and I enjoy it. However, there are probably some movies or shows that I should avoid based on my hypervigilance issues. And like an example of this, it's kind of funny, but I think it's applicable. But like an example would be the Final Destination movies. Are those movies stupid and cheesy and kind of fun? Like, yeah. But given my issues, should I be filling my mind with entertainment that is centered around? What is it centered around? Those movies are centered around outlandish, violent accidents happening and killing people. I should probably not be filling my mind with entertainment like that. I'm not telling you to not watch those movies or whatever, but I'm saying for me, I do a good enough job of creating crazy violent scenarios in my mind on a regular basis. I don't need movies contributing to that on top of that. Like, I'm already writing these movies in my mind on a day-to-day basis. I don't need to exacerbate that situation. If you've seen any of those Final Destination movies, one of the movies, and I forget which one it is, it has a disaster on the highway and it's like a huge, I don't know how many car pile up, but there's a logging truck and all of the logs fall off and one of them bounces off the highway and goes through somebody's windshield and decapitates them. And I'll be honest, to this day, I cannot drive behind a truck that's hauling logs or telephone poles or anything that resembles that. It's been, I don't know how many years since I saw that film, and to this day, I immediately think of that scene if I get behind a truck that's hauling that stuff on the highway and I got to move and go around and change lanes. So I think it would probably be wise for me to avoid certain movies or forms of entertainment like that. So thinking about what music am I listening to? What are the lyrics? What is it actually talking about? Is it making my mental health better or worse? What movies am I watching? What is this feeding my mind with all the time, and is this making my situation better or worse? So that's something I've been working on too. But really, honestly, all of this, when it comes to hypervigilance, what it boils down to me in my life, what it boils down to is trying to slow down in my day-to-day life. And I'm horrible at this. Struggle with it just absolutely immensely. I'm just trying to take a deep breath and think it through when I start to worry. Okay, take a deep breath. Okay, what am I thinking about right now? How realistic is this threat or danger that I'm contemplating? And more importantly, how much control do I have over this situation? Am I worrying about something that's realistic? And whether or not it's realistic, am I worrying and having anxiety about something that I can even control? Because most of the time, most of our anxiety, whether it's mental health issues, PTSD, just normal anxiety that people have, you're typically worrying about something that you can't even control, which when you really think about it is kind of crazy. Now, I struggle with it, so I'm not judging anybody for that. But when you really take a step back and be like, should I be worrying about this? Is it even realistic? You'd be surprised how often you're worrying about things that aren't realistically going to happen, and you have no control over them regardless. So I think it's important to have a plan when the tornado sirens go off here in Kentucky. Like, I think I should prepare for that and have a plan for how to get to the basement. Prepare for situations that I can control, but not get so focused on all the millions of remote possibilities that I have no control over. That's kind of where I'm at. What do I tell myself? Stop scanning the room at the cost of missing the moment. Stop searching for danger or disaster around every corner so that I can't enjoy the little things in life. And I have missed out on so much in my life over the last decade plus because I've been so worried and concerned about so many things that aren't realistically going to happen. And even if they are potential possibility, I can't control them. That's much easier said than done, but that's what I'm working through. Now, I hope that some of what I said maybe resonated with some of you. I don't have all the answers. And like I said in the first episode, I'm kind of treating this as my verbal journal. I'm just walking through life with you guys and sharing what I'm going through. And I hope it helps some of you. I appreciate all of you. This is the Silent Siren, and I am Jason Demo. I will talk to you next time. And which of you, by being anxious, can add a single hour to his span of life? Luke chapter 12, verse 25.